Hello and welcome to Tea with Jess. I'm Jess Montgomery and I'm delighted to have you joining me for a tea break. As Nana says in my Kinship Mystery Series, life is hard, have tea. And my mug today, well, it's kind of washed out. Whoop, if I get really close, you can see it. You can see it's Proud Air Force Mom. So I have a child in the military, and I've been after her for a couple years to get us mugs. And finally, we have Proud Parent mugs. So that's my mug for today. My guest for today is Eliot Parker. He's the author of 5 novels, Breakdown at Clear Creek, Making Arrangements, Fragile Brilliance, Code for Murder, and A Knife's Edge. And his 6th novel is A Final Call, which just came out. He currently teaches English at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss, and hosts the podcast program Now Appalachia across the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network and Blog Talk Radio, which profiles authors and publishers who live and write about Appalachia. And that's how I got to meet and know Eliot. He had me on Now Appalachia for all 3 of my kinship novels, starting with The Widows, and I will confess that was one of the first podcasts I'd ever done as a guest, and I was really nervous. But Eliot made me feel super comfortable, and since then we've also been on a panel together for Ohio Anna, and I was delighted to provide a blurb for his newest novel, A Final Call. And so now I'm excited to welcome to Tea with Jess, Eliot.
Hi,
Hello.
Jess. Hello,
Hi.
Jess. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be with you.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. And what is your mug? We've got to share a mug on Tea with Jess.
I don't really have a mug. I have more of a cup.
Uh-huh.
This is what some people are familiar with. This is the traditional, never imitated or duplicated red hefty mug cup that some of us are familiar with if we have picnics or family reunions or tailgates or things like that. And I chose this cup today because this has been a very special cup to me. When I was in college, this was all I could afford in terms of silverware and things to drink out of. And I didn't have a dishwasher in my apartment either. So I was able to buy these. These were a little more durable than paper cups, but they weren't quite glassware that I had to worry about breaking or sitting on the counter somewhere and it getting knocked off. So it's just right in the middle. And so ever since then, I have been a huge fan of the red hefty cup, and it is like my writing cup. I always have something, tea or Diet Pepsi or something in there with me when I'm writing. So nothing fancy about my mug today, just a good old red hefty cup.
You know, I'm seeing the practicality and the beauty of your cup. I think you should write an essay about your cup of choice as a writer.
Yes, because we all have that one thing that's on our writer's desk. You know, maybe it's a paperweight, a cup, a quote, a figurine, a bobblehead doll, something to kind of that's been with us through all of our experiences. And so, yeah, those would make a great collection of essays, actually.
I think we have a project, Eliot.
I think we do.
I think we do. Seriously, that would be fun. I've got my little candle holder, which is a turtle that my kid got me.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Like years ago, as a little like Mother's Day gift, and so I just slow and steady wins the race is what I think every time I light a little candle, a little votive candle in there. So tell us, without spoilers, about A Final Call.
Oh, sure. Be glad to. This is a sequel to a book that you mentioned a minute ago called Code for Murder. It is set in Cleveland, Ohio. It follows the journeys of a Cleveland homicide detective named Stacy Tabbitt. And in A Final Call, this book picks up a few months after the incident in Code for Murder, which basically in Code for Murder, her primary investigation, she was trying to find out who murdered a Cleveland Browns football player. And so that was a case that it was her first case back from medical leave. I don't want to spoil too much, but she was injured in a undercover sting that had gone wrong at the beginning of Code for Murder. And so she'd been off for a while, and her first case back was really the highest and most involved profiled case of her career, which was investigating the death of Cleveland Browns football player. So after everything gets wrapped up from there, there's a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of Code for Murder that picks up several months later in a final call. And basically, what is going on in a final call is Stacy's brother Chance has gone missing. He's gone missing as a result of things that happened to him and Stacy at the end of Code for Murder. And so Stacy's got that on her mind, and she's trying to find out where he is and what happened to him. And in the midst of all of that, she is approached by a former college friend, a former college classmate whose son has gone missing, or she thinks her son has gone missing, and wants Stacy's help in finding out what happened to him. And at first, Stacy thinks that there's not really anything abnormal about her son's disappearance. Her friend's name's Monica, and her son's name is Colton. So she's not really worried, nothing sort of trips her up in terms of what might happen to Colton. She kind of thinks Colton's just acting like any old 20-year-old kid would, who doesn't want to have anything to do with his parents. He's living in Houston now. He's working for AEP, laying electrical lines and doing electrician work, and so he's kind of living his own life. And so Stacy doesn't think there's anything really suspicious about his disappearance until an ex-girlfriend of his is found murdered. And Colton's ex-girlfriend is found murdered, and there are signs pointing to him being there and him being involved in her death. And so all of a sudden that becomes back into Stacy's purview in terms of, well, maybe there is more going on here than just him trying to ignore his parents. And so she's got kind of dual things going on. She's trying to find out what happened to her brother Chance, where he is, and then also trying to find out where is Colton DeVito, and why is he involved in the death of his ex-girlfriend, and why, and really what's going on there. So she's got a lot on her plate when it all starts.
A lot of interweaving plot threads and character arcs and lots of questions. I love that. It's great. Well, obviously I loved it because I blurbed it.
Yeah, which I appreciate very much, by the way.
Yes, and I was delighted to do so. But I had a couple questions, even though I read the novel, a couple questions about, I guess, your writing process in a way, and about the story. So the novel is set in Cleveland, which I find fascinating because I think of you as being from West Virginia. Is that correct? Is that where you grew up?
Right, that's where I grew up.
Okay.
Right.
So you grew up in Appalachia. Did you grow up in a small town, the countryside, a city?
I grew up in Charleston, so it was the capital city, yeah.
The capital city. So, okay. So you grew up in a big city. So maybe that's partly what drew you to set a novel in Cleveland. But I'm curious what drew you to a big city setting.
Well, Cleveland is just a great city for a lot of different reasons. It's got just about everything that you would expect in a big city. It's got the more posh, pristine shopping malls and restaurants district that you'd see in a big city. It's got some of the urban squalor that you would expect in a big city. It's all bracketed by Lake Erie, which gives it kind of that port city feel, which I love. But what's interesting about Cleveland is all of those neighborhoods and all of that gentrification is literally within blocks of each other. You can be on East 9th Street in downtown Cleveland and be at Tower City, where where BP used to have headquarters there, and where Xerox used to have an Eastern regional office there, and the big glass towers and the malls and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Great Lakes Science Center, and then walk 2 blocks to the left, and you're in what most people think of with big cities, which is kind of urban squalor and that kind of thing. Or you can go, 3 or 4 blocks to the right, and you're in the Little Italy neighborhood, which is kind of a very culturally diverse area. And it's all sort of layered on top of each other. So it's fascinating that all of these different people come together and interact and come across each other's paths every day. So that fascinated me about it. And also, my dad's side of the family, a lot of them grew up and lived in eastern West Virginia. And when the coal mines closed in the 60s and 70s, and they were put out of work, they all migrated north. And they went to work in the Goodyear rubber plant in Akron. They went to work in the shipyards and the steel mills down by Lake Erie. And so we would go up there and visit them a lot, when I was growing up. And sadly, most of them are deceased now. But that's how I got exposed to Cleveland. And we'd go around and see everything. And my family's big Browns fans as a result of that. And so I wanted to write a book set in a place that I didn't live or wasn't from. And so I felt like Cleveland was another place that I had been to enough, that I felt like I was familiar enough with the city. And it also gave me an excuse to kind of go back and visit over the last few years to see some old neighborhoods and places and highways and things that I remembered. So that's how I ended up choosing Cleveland. But it's just a great city to set a story, and just so much fun and so much going on there. And you can do so many things because, like I said, the way the neighborhoods are set up and the way the city is set up, all kinds of possibilities for mayhem to happen, sort of the way it's laid out.
That's interesting. I have been to Cleveland, I think, twice. I had a daughter who was interested in college, one of the colleges there, so we did a college visit. And then years before that, I had a cousin who unfortunately was in a terrible accident and was sent to the VA hospital up there. Um, but that's my sole experience with Cleveland. So, and I'm a native Buckeye, a native Ohioan. But if Cleveland feels like a world apart from the rest of Ohio, it feels like a much bigger city, a more sophisticated city. Um, like, I actually said to my husband the other day, we should go visit Cleveland. Like, this is like going to, I don't know, Philadelphia or something. It's going on a trip, even though it's in the same state. So that's really interesting about Cleveland. And we share in common that my family were all tobacco farmers, not coal miners, but they, when that was not a great way to make a living anymore, they came, some of them went south, but most of them came north to Dayton. So it's that, that migration, but to a different part of Ohio. So interesting. So I have tried, but I have not pulled off writing a male protagonist. So I'm curious if there were challenges for you in writing a female protagonist. So how did you get into Stacy's voice, her point of view? I asked a female friend and writer who writes a male protagonist how she did that and pulled that off. And she said she read a lot of male protagonists and male writers out loud. So did you do something kind of like that? How did you get into that voice?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I really like Stacy as a character, because not only is she an interesting dynamic character, but as you were saying, Jess, it really kind of challenged me because I had to step inside the mindset of a female protagonist. And so
Mm-hmm.
I did do a lot. I did read a lot of stories where female protagonists were involved, particularly J.A. Jance does a lot of
Mm-hmm.
thriller novels with female protagonists. Nora Roberts does a lot through her J.D. Robb series, does a lot of female protagonists. Catherine Coulter and some other writers with her Kate Scarpelli character. So I read a lot of writers who maybe were females, but writing in female protagonists, so I could get a sense of how they constructed those characters and made them so
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But I also had a chance to talk to some female police officers and female detectives, and it was fascinating I was able to talk to them sort of outside of the precinct.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of the precinct with no prying ears around, I was amazed at what they said, how they viewed their profession, how they viewed their roles, and as a in that profession. Uh, yeah, they are just like you would expect any police officer to be, very, very dedicated to their job, and it's a calling for them, and they very much believe what they do is important. But a few that I talked to basically said, we are still in kind of a male dominated profession, and
Mm-hmm.
we are still sort of, even though we've gone to the police academy, we've worked our way up the ladder just like our male colleagues and counterparts have. There's still sort of a side eyes glance that they get, or a sideways glance they get sometimes, or some sighing and some eye rolling when they say something when they're in a room, but predominantly of male officers and detectives. And so while they felt like they'd come a long way in terms of the equality in that area, especially at the detective level, because typically those folks have really started out as patrolmen and officers, beat officers as they call them, and worked their way up. They worked their way up to corporal, to sergeant, to lieutenant, and captain, and so on and so forth. As they've gone up those ranks, that they feel like that they've made a lot of progress, but that there's still a long way to go. And so just hearing them and asking them, how are cases different from you than maybe they would be from your male partner, your male colleague. And I had one former police officer, former homicide detective of the Cleveland Police Department, tell me. She said, one thing that always bothered me, she said, was the cases involving children.
Yeah.
She said, when we would respond to a call, a homicide, and there was a child in the room that came upon the victim, or heaven forbid saw the murder take place. And she said, those were the things that kept me up at night, was thinking about those children and what was going to happen to those children. And so, I think one of the things I learned from those discussions, it's kind of like a long story short, is that female detectives, from what I gathered from conversations and what I read from other writers writing those kinds of characters, is that they feel things a little more viscerally and a little more emotionally, maybe, than the male counterparts do, than the male detectives. That's not to say that they don't either, but it's a much more emotional kind of heartbreaking experience, what they deal with, and how they interpret what they're dealing with on the job. And so when I think about Stacy and I think about the circumstances that she's in, she has many moments in A Final Call and in Code for Murder where she's just about on the verge of collapse, not only because of her health challenges from what happened to her in Code for Murder, but of the emotional and physical exhaustion, because she carries things so deeply and personally in her heart. And so that leads to so many physical and emotional and mental stresses that she has. And that plays out in different ways for her and her relationships with others. And so, yeah, just basically reading other writers and talking to female officers and females who've been homicide detectives, both in Cleveland, CPD, and other places, really helped me kind of get an understanding for how to make Stacy, realistic, but also human too.
And I think you did a great job with that. So, did you find people opened up to you really quickly? I mean, I'm sure it's always a compliment to an expert if you say to them, "You're an expert, and I'd love for you to share your expertise." But how was that research process?
It was really interesting. I found that there was a little bit of a give and take at first, because and I think some of this has to do with the fact that they deal with the media a lot, even as detectives, because when they go to a crime scene and the media is there, there's always somebody sticking a microphone in their face, or a cell phone under their chin and asking them questions, and some could be very pushy. And so once I think they realize it's not that kind of an interview, that I'm not doing that kind of an interview, or I'm not here to do a hit piece or a gotcha piece or something like that, that I'm, like you said, I'm genuinely interested in what you do and why you do it. It's almost like the veneer cracks, and I can just see the sort of relaxed posture, and I just can almost see them taking in a deep breath and being like, okay, he really is interested in what I have to say. And so I tell them, I say, I will not use your name. I will not use any identifying information, what precinct you were in, your rank. Were you a captain, lieutenant, sergeant? This is totally, and I mean, I have that record. I have that information from my records, but I don't acknowledge that in the book. They're not on the acknowledgments pages. I don't publicly say who told me what.
Mm-hmm.
I found once I can guarantee that anonymity for them, they're also much more likely to talk. And I've been able to go on ride-alongs with the Ohio Highway Patrol. I've been able to do
Nice.
all kinds of things, which is great. Sitting in the back of a patrol car, and I'll never forget when I called my mom and told her that. I was like, "Mom, you'll never guess what I did today. I spent the afternoon in the back of a patrol car." I know. She was just thinking, "What? Well, what do you mean?" And so that was my favorite gotcha mom story.
What did you do, son?
Yeah, that's right. I don't know how funny she thought it was. I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
But just hearing, listening to the conversations on the radio, watching the officer put things into the lap. They have laptop computers on their dashboards now, and just watching what they put in and what pops up on their screen, and what does it feel like when we're driving down the road? What does it smell like on the inside? All of those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that I try to work into the stories as well. But I found that once people knew that I was genuinely interested in their profession and why they do what they do, and that this is not some kind of this is not going to be on the front page of the Plain Dealer the next day, identifying them as doing something right or wrong, I did get a lot more open and honest discussion. And I tried to keep my questions very short. I didn't take up a lot of their time. I went in with 5 or 10 things I really wanted to know. I asked them, I got my information, I asked any follow-up questions, and I thanked them for their time. And I think they appreciated that too, that I wasn't here to monopolize, because they have other things to do, more important things than to talk to me. So, but it's been a fascinating experience, and I've learned as a writer too. And I know you know this too, Jess, doing research for your books. People love it when you genuinely come to them and say, "I'm interested in what you do, and tell me why you do it, and I have some questions about specifically what you do." People are 99.9% of the time thrilled that you're interested, and will very much be open and honest with you. If they know that you're not going to publicize what they tell you or mention their names or anything like that. So it was a great experience. I learned a lot, and I enjoy that part of the process of writing thrillers. Is and same with attorneys. Going to an attorney and saying, "Hey, I've got a scene where I've got a prosecutor and a cop talking about this. How would that conversation go? What would you say? What would you not say? How would you get a search warrant for this? What would happen if that happened?" And folks have been so kind and generous in giving me their expertise.
Those are great research and interview tips. For any writers out there listening and wondering, well, how do I get information? Everything Eliot just shared with us that's the best way to approach it. But it leads me to another question for you, which is, what drew you to thriller writing and mystery writing? Why this genre?
Oh, well.
Why not this genre, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, this has been my favorite genre since I was a kid. I was talking about my mom a moment ago when I called her and told her I spent the afternoon in the back of an Ohio highway patrol car. She started all of this because she was a nurse, and kind of her way of unwinding in the evenings and in the mornings was to read, to kind of get her mind off of what she'd done at work. And so we had books all over the place. Books in every room, books in our bathroom. I mean, you name it, we always had books. My mom always had 4 or 5 books going at the same time, which I did not inherit that ability to do that. I can only do one at a time.
Yeah.
But and I can remember, anytime I wanted a book, Mom always would get me one. That was the one thing I had no spending limit on. Anytime I wanted a book, she would buy me one. So that got it all started. But I was, as a kid growing up, I loved the Encyclopedia Brown mystery stories. The author's name escapes me at the moment, but he passed away just a few years ago. I loved those stories. And then Scholastic used to do these choose your mystery books, where you would read, a few pages, and it would say, if you want Joe to do this, turn to page 17. If you want Joe to do that, turn to page 25. Well, it was such a smart marketing tool because you ended up getting 2 books in one, because you wanted to read through and pick a certain set of decisions and then go back and read it again and pick the opposite set of decisions. And so those 2 books growing up as a kid, the Encyclopedia Brown books and also those Scholastic Choose Your Mystery books were my favorites. And I loved reading them. I just couldn't get enough of them. And so that got me started on that. And I love to read everything. I try to read a little of everything, even if it's not a genre that I really like. But I find myself, if you gave me $20 and turned me loose in a bookstore and said, you got to go buy one book and only one book, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to find that mystery thriller story first. If you give me my own choice. Not to say I don't pick other things, but so that's kind of where it started. I just love the fact of not knowing what's going to happen. I love the fact of someone's done something bad, and can the protagonist catch them before it's too late? Just that whole kind of heart racing, pulse pounding story. Is my favorite. And that's really where it all got started, was those 2 sets of books when I was a kid.
That's awesome. Well, but you also write short stories. And you have a collection called Snapshots that came out just last year, right?
Right.
So I'm curious about that, how writing a short story differs for you from writing a novel. Does it tickle a different part of your brain or imagination? Or do you just start with an idea and organically follow it to see, well, what's it going to be? How does that process work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like as a writer, I learned how to writing short stories, and I had a chance to study for a summer semester with Jim Grimsley. He used to teach creative writing at Emory University in Atlanta, and he's retired now, but he really gave me some great advice about making that transition from short stories to novels. He said, think about a short story as a scene in a movie, and ultimately, you have a character at the beginning of the story, and they have a want or a need, and are they going to get that by the end of the story? And he said, think of a novel as a set of those scenes or a set of smaller stories in around a larger story arc.
Hmm.
And at the end of every chapter, he said your character should be either closer to getting what it is that they want or farther away from getting what they want. And if they're farther away, how are they going to rebound and take 2 steps forward in the next chapter or the next 2 chapters? And that has stuck with me ever since then, because I think being comfortable with that short story structure where you are limited. Economy of words is important. You've got to really kind of grab the reader from the first page, and you want to sustain them through 3,000 words or 6,000 words or 7,000 words to a satisfying conclusion. You've got to work other characters in there. You've got to work a setting in there. You've got to do so many things that you do in novels, but you have to have real control and mastery over it in a short story. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like being able to kind of understand those skills has helped me become a novelist. And sometimes, when I'm writing a novel and I've written a character into a corner, or I've got Stacy with her back against the wall and there's 2 guys with guns pointed at her, and I have no idea how she's going to get out of that corner, and I'm
Literal corner.
yeah, she's in the wrong corner. That sometimes I will go and write a short story or work on a short story. That'll kind of keep my creative writing juices going, but also kind of clear my mind from that, whatever it is that's keeping me from finishing that one scene in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been helpful to me too. And there's a lot of things I like to write that just wouldn't make good novels. It's just, things that I want to write about or ideas I have that just fit well into a short story. But I love short stories. I'm so thrilled as a reader that short stories are making a comeback, and that
Mm-hmm.
short stories are making it on the New York Times bestseller list, and they're winning book awards, and they're being featured on the front shelves and the front shelves of bookstores, front pages of Publishers Weekly and other places like that, because it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah.
And so maybe that has something to do with our attention span.
It might.
Bite-sized information instead of a longer novel. But I'm so thrilled that those have come back. But I will always write short stories, no matter how many novels that I write, because I owe a lot to the short story genre for teaching me some of the writing skills that help me with my novels. So they're a lot of fun. I enjoy them. And that Snapshots collection you were talking about, some of those stories I had written when I was getting my MFA at Eastern Kentucky University. Some of them I'd been writing over the last few years in between novels and things like that. So that collection actually started probably in 2011. So it took me about 9 years to kind of get it together. And not every story I wrote made that collection because thematically it just didn't fit. But I was real proud of that. I was real proud to get to share some short stories with an audience. And it won the Feathered Quill Book Award. It won the Pencraft Award in 2020 for Best Short Story Collection. I was thrilled
Mm-hmm.
to see that, again, that people are recognizing the value and the literary merit of short fiction, and that it's not something that is a secondary kind of genre compared to novels or memoirs or biography. That it's right up there at the top. So it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy doing it.
That's awesome. Well, you have a lot on your plate. You mentioned that you have your hat tip to your professor. You yourself are a professor, so you've got your career at Ole Miss, you've got your podcast, you've got your writing, you've got a family life. How do you organize your day and juggle all of this?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. I'm not sure I always do it well. I'm very fortunate that I have a partner who's very supportive, and he's wonderful, and knows that if I disappear for 2 hours, or if I tell him, hey, I'm going to go write today, you can go do what you want to, go to the mall, whatever. Today's my writing day. He's very supportive of that. I'm also very, very, in terms of the writing, I feel like, and Jess, you and I've talked about this kind of in different contexts over the years. I just feel like, and I think you do too to some degree, you just have to carve out a part of your day and schedule that writing time, just like you would your work time, just like you would dinner time, laundry time, walking the dog time, whatever it is that you've got going on in your life. You have to schedule that writing time in, because if you wait for the perfect moment in your day or in your week, it's never going to come.
It's never going to happen.
No,
Yeah.
there's always going to be laundry to do. There's always going to be papers
Mm-hmm.
to grade. There's always going to be emails to check. There's always going to be something going on that pulls you away from your writing time. And so the only way that I've been able to manage all of that is I just have to look at and I'm fortunate that every semester kind of is different for me at Ole Miss. my spring semester won't be exactly the same as my fall semester, and next fall won't be the same as the spring, and all of that. So I have some flexibility there, but I just have to look at my kind of like my weekly, monthly, semesterly calendar and just say, okay, today, tomorrow I'm going to write from 1 to 3, and then maybe on Wednesday it's going to be 9 to 11, or Friday it's going to be 8 to 10. I mean, it just kind of varies depending on what I've got going on. But for me, that's the way I can balance it. Is I just have to carve out a certain time, and that time changes a little bit. When I was living in West Virginia, and I was working teaching community college and university at Marshall University and at Mount West Community College there, my work schedule was a lot different. And so I had to get up really early in the morning, like before anybody in my house got up, before the animals got up, before anybody else got up at 4:35 and whatever to get it done, because I just was so busy during the day. And then by the time I got home, it was 5 or 6 o'clock and I was brain dead and couldn't think of anything. But now that I've sort of changed positions there, and now I'm working at Ole Miss, I've got a little bit more flexibility, so that's helped a little bit. But I just feel like I have to carve out the time to do it. If I don't, next thing I know, 7, 8, 9 days go by and I haven't made any progress, and so that's what works for me. And again, I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but I've tried everything else and nothing seems to work with that.
Well, and it's worked well for you, so. And you're right. You're absolutely right. You have to pick the time frame, whatever it is, and dedicate yourself to it. Well, thank you for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your book or about the writing life before we say ta-ta?
I don't think so, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for doing this program. I've discovered so many great authors watching your interviews, and I'm just amazed at, and I know you are too, at the wonderful writing talent we have, not just in Appalachia or in Ohio or in Mississippi, but all over the country. We've just got some folks that are just killing it with some great stuff. And it's so great to be able to read it, but also to get to hear them talk about why they do the things that they do. So thanks for providing a platform like this for us to come on and talk about.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I appreciate those kind words very much. Well, thank you everyone for joining us live or tuning in the recording later, joining us for Tea with Jess. So until our next tea break, be good to yourself and your loved ones and have fun. Thank you.